Next up is saffron cake, which is really a sweet yeast bread. But don't let the yeast scare you. It's actually very simple. So in the bowl, I have 7 cups of flour, just regular flour, and 1.5 cups of sugar. So into that are 2 sticks of butter that I've already chopped up. Oops. And then you work it in with your pastry blender. That'll take a few minutes to get it finely distributed. Okay, so the butter is all incorporated. Now what we want to do, 2 packets of dry yeast. And now, one of the secret ingredients is saffron, the most expensive herb in the world, $5,000 a pound. I get mine from Penzeys. This little jar cost, I think, $18.95, but it goes a long way, and you can reuse these threads. So I've just put a few pinches of saffron threads in warm water, and here's the rest of our water, which if you're not comfortable, it should be about 105 degrees, just should be, warm on your wrist. So strain the saffron threads, which comes from a crocus, and believe it or not, this crocus was raised in England. This recipe is from Cornwall, but there's also a town or village in England called Saffron Walden, which became famous for growing the sativa crocus that the saffron comes from. So stir that in. We've got our peel and currants. You'll notice that currants and dried peel, candied peel, are very popular in lots of British baking recipes. And stir that around. And then here's the liquid. Gives it a nice little bit of color and a very interesting aroma. And sometimes it takes a little more, so we'll just see how it all mixes together. What's neat about this recipe is there's no proofing of the yeast. You just mix it in the recipe with the warm water, and then you cover it with saran wrap or clear wrap, and then just forget about it for a few hours, and it just rises up beautifully. So it takes a little bit to work all this in, and sometimes you have to add just a little bit more water, but that's okay. This also freezes nicely, so you can make it up ahead of time if you need to. And this recipe makes 3 loaves, which is nice, at least in the size pans that I use. So it's just about all done now. Okay. And you can certainly use your hands to finish incorporating all of that dry flour. And this was just all-purpose flour, not a self-rising flour. And just knead it a couple of times. Okay, so just kind of pat it down. Now, what I'm going to do is put saran wrap over that, but I'm going to show you real quickly one I made in advance, and it has been rising for quite some time. I usually set it aside for like 5 or 6 hours. So here's the saffron cake, just setting aside to rise for several hours, and here it is panned up, ready to bake. So now we're on to the last tea treat of the day, which is something very different and I think unusual, and that is Welsh tea cakes. And they're actually small, like little pancakes that are baked on a griddle, because everybody had a griddle and not everybody had an oven. So 2 cups of self-rising flour, 1 cup of a combination of butter and lard. No Crisco allowed. You got to use the real thing, the lard. And a teaspoon of mixed spice. I use allspice. A dash of salt. And we're going to mix this all together with the good old pastry blender. My lovely assistant, my daughter Amelia, was taking a break from watching me do all this. I added the sugar because I forgot to add the sugar. So next up, we add the currants. And here we have an egg beaten with a little bit of milk. And to top that off, just a little, about a teaspoon of honey. And then we're going to stir all this together to make a dough. And sometimes you have to add just a little more milk. So what we're going to do is roll this out with a fluted round cutter, which is tea size, because apparently in Wales they're actually much larger, but I like the smaller size because they're good for afternoon tea. Alright, so this needs a little bit more milk. So I'm just going to add just a touch here and there. Let's see if this comes together in a ball now. Okay. So now we're going to flour our surface. Just knead it a couple of times. Flour the rolling pin a little. And that's about right. Okay, I want to stop for a second. Okay, so it's rolled out to about 1/4 of an inch. Dip your cutter in flour. And just work your way around. Okay, and gently pick them up. We're going to take it over to the griddle. If I stick a little on the bottom, that's okay. So that recipe made 20 Welsh tea cakes, and I just sprinkled just a little bit of sugar on them as they cool down, and then I put them in a tin and they keep for several days. Delicious.